The story begins in Los Angeles, where journalist Karen White works for the KDHB network. In the past few weeks, she has been receiving phone calls from a man who identifies himself as Eddie and suspects he might be a criminal. The police set up a scheme to catch him, and to do this, Karen arranges a meeting with Eddie. With a wire under her clothing, she waits for his call in a specific phone booth, becoming increasingly nervous with the delay. Her husband, Bill, is not happy about this trap with his wife as bait. In the station's bathroom, an anchor named Fred is practicing the introduction of the breaking news, completely insensitive to Bill's concerns. A journalist named Terry introduces Bill to the detectives, who are using the station's equipment to monitor the wiretap. However, when Eddie finally calls, the sound is so poor that they can hardly hear anything, and Bill becomes furious with the team's incompetence. Unaware that the police have lost contact, Karen follows Eddie's instructions and goes to a private cinema to meet him in one of the booths. Initially, he doesn't let her see his face and plays a horrible video in which a young woman is attacked. He says that these girls never feel anything because they are not as alive as he is. Karen is the only one with potential, as she is different from the others, and this is the reason for his obsession. Then Eddie starts breathing strangely, and his voice changes when he says he has something to give her and asks her to look at him. Karen turns around, and her scream barely escapes her throat as she is horrified by what she sees. A few meters from the door, the police are describing Karen to the attendant, who confirms having directed her to one of the doors just moments ago. It's then that she finds her voice, and the police rush into the booth as soon as they hear her screams, firing multiple shots. Eddie is shot down, and Karen's colleagues at the station waste no time broadcasting the entire drama live. It is then that we discover Eddie was responsible for a series of murders in the neighborhood. The police had already suspected that the maniac was the same person bothering Karen, which is why they organized this trap that, despite traumatizing her, ended favorably for the population. Bill goes to the crime scene with a reporter friend, Chris, and the two try to comfort Karen, telling her she doesn't need to give her statement right now. The reporter says the station can record her account later, but then Karen explains it won't be possible because her mind has erased everything she saw inside the booth, and she remembers absolutely nothing. But even so, the trauma remains, and some horrific scenes start to haunt her in constant nightmares. Meanwhile, Terry and Chris investigate Eddie's life and discover where he lived. The walls of the apartment are covered with clippings and various drawings of furry creatures. When Terry finds a drawing of Karen's face, she says it's time to call the police, but Chris wants to search a bit more. The only normal drawing they find is a landscape, and Terry suspects it might be a real place. The two take all this to Dr. George Wagner, a famous psychiatrist who is always giving interviews on television. By the signature on the drawings, they discover the killer's full name was Eddie Quist. At home, Karen rejects her husband's affections, explaining that she is not ready for that yet, and Bill understands without insisting. Unlike him, the station is not willing to wait so long, and Karen soon has to return to work. Chris and Terry are worried about their friend's fragile appearance, but Fred can't wait to shine alongside the heroine, only making matters worse by saying the whole country is waiting to watch her. However, as soon as the show starts, the set lights dazzle Karen, and she sees the scenes from that horrible video in the camera lens. She is unable to say anything beyond the initial goodnight, and the crew panics to get her off air before they suffer even more embarrassment. After this fiasco, Karen decides to consult Dr. Wagner, who recommends a few days at Colony, his private clinic. He says it is a peaceful place where she will have a better chance of recovering her memory and resuming her life without major issues. Karen accepts the suggestion, but on the way there, she confesses to her husband that she might not want to remember what she saw. The Colony staff is having a lively barbecue when the two arrive that night. A man named Jerry welcomes them and introduces his wife, Donna. She immediately recognizes Karen and says she is her fan, chatting in an inconvenient manner. Then Jerry takes the newcomers to Charlie Barton, one of the board members, and the men focus on the food, while Donna offers to give Karen a tour of the clinic. When Bill decides to look for her, he talks to some of the stranger patients, including a woman named Marcia, who responds enigmatically to everything. Donna and Karen end up finding Wagner, and Karen thanks the doctor for the opportunity. She assures him that she feels better there than at the station, but the fixed gaze of some patients makes her uncomfortable as it reminds her of her murderous admirer. Marcia rudely interrupts the conversation and returns the doctor's book, called The Gift. She says she doesn't want her brother TC reading it and accuses Wagner of having already caused a lot of damage. Nobody is very shocked by the fight since Marcia is one of the patients, and this could all be part of her symptoms. The party goes on smoothly for a few hours, until an old man starts screaming, wanting to throw himself onto the fire. Karen is frightened by the scene, but Donna explains that the old man is Earl, a patient who does everything to get attention. That night, Karen wakes up again after a disturbing dream and tries to call Bill, but he is sleeping heavily. She then goes to the window to peek outside and is startled by a terrifying howl coming from the woods. She rushes back to bed and starts shaking her husband until he wakes up. However, he doesn't even get up and just says that it's the sound of the wind, laughing at Karen's inexperience with nature. Sleepless, she curls up in front of the fireplace to warm up. And it is then that another noise intrigues her. Outside, we see something approaching her cabin with animalistic grunts. Not wanting to wake Bill again, she goes out with a flashlight and finds a sort of web hanging from a bush. Then there is a muffled sound that seems like a shot, followed by the cries of pain from some animal. Karen rushes back to the cabin and closes the door, unaware that a face has been watching her the whole time. The next day she is calmer and agrees to a game of tennis with Donna. Sheriff Sam shows up on the court and comments on a complaint from Wagner regarding the coyotes in the area, saying that must have been what Karen heard the previous night. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Terry and Chris decide to visit the coroner to see the body of Eddie Quist. The coroner is as surprised as the two when he opens the drawer and finds it empty, with the door full of marks on the inside. At night, Donna and Karen hear more strange noises coming from somewhere in the clinic. Donna says it is just the cows, but Karen doesn't think it is a normal moo and asks to borrow Jerry's rifle. The two then start exploring the woods and, arriving at a fence, they find the head of a bull. Karen's flashlight goes out at that moment, and she screams when a hand touches her shoulder, but it is just Sheriff Sam. He also arrived there following the moos and says it certainly wasn't a coyote that did that to the bull. Because of this incident, some men gather to hunt the wild animal before there are more problems. Bill joins them, ignoring Karen's concern, who feels guilty in anticipation if something bad happens to him. Bill convinces her that everything is fine and heads into the woods with the group, while Karen goes to a therapy session. Wagner tries to help her remember that terrible night, but the memory always fades at the moment she turns her face, and she cannot recall what she saw after that. In town, Terry and Chris research the relationship between serial killers and the occult, trying to find out who could have stolen Eddie's body. In a specialized bookstore, they talk to a man who knows everything about werewolves. He says that a lot of it is just Hollywood nonsense, like the transformation during a full moon. According to him, werewolves can transform at any time. As for silver bullets, they are indeed the only way to eliminate one permanently, as anything else will only knock them down until they regenerate. Meanwhile, Bill only manages to hit a rabbit during the hunt, and TC praises his future dinner, but he explains that he doesn't eat meat. Saying that it is a sin to kill an animal if you do not intend to eat it, TC invites him to the cabin he shares with his sister Marcia, so she can make a stew. Bill accepts the offer but is surprised by a kiss from Marcia, who even bites his lip. Startled, he decides to leave and begins crossing the woods back to his cabin. More whining sounds and howls begin to surround him, getting closer, and we see a pair of yellow eyes lurking. Suddenly, he is knocked down by a huge creature that bites him and then disappears back into the forest. Bill stumbles to the cabin and calls his wife's name, who is horrified to see him in that state, and takes him straight to the doctor. While Wagner administers an injection, Karen says she wants to leave the clinic, but he recommends not to travel until Bill gets better. Terry and Chris are enjoying a werewolf movie when Karen calls to tell that her husband was bitten by a wolf. Chris thinks Terry is exaggerating with her suspicions, as deep down he doesn't believe in these legends, and thinks it is better to keep working while she goes to the clinic to comfort her friend. Upon arriving there, Terry prepares dinner and worries when she realizes she forgot that Bill is a vegetarian, but he eats without issue and says he doesn't mind. Later, Karen shows signs that she is ready to resume their conjugal life, and this time it is Bill who rejects her, blaming the painful injections. She goes to sleep a little upset and has another strange dream in which she sees his face in the cinema booth. In the middle of the night, she wakes up and sees that Bill is not in bed. We see that he is walking outside with a somnambulistic look until he finds Marcia. She surrenders to him there on the floor, and the two begin to undergo a transformation together. Their teeth become a pair of fangs, their nails turn into claws, and long fur starts to cover their bodies. The two growl and howl like animals, making so much noise that Terry decides to record the sound from the window. The next morning, Bill has returned to normal, and Terry discovers a place in the clinic from where the same landscape Eddie drew can be seen. She decides to explore more of the clinic's property, and then hears someone whispering her name. The voice begins to call her towards an isolated cabin, and we see a paw rising among the bushes behind her. Obeying the voice, Terry goes to the shack with macabre decorations and finds one of the doors open. Since it doesn't seem like anyone is home, she decides to go in and takes pictures of the drawings on the walls while a furry creature moves outside. Seeing a familiar sticker on a door, she enters that room and finds everything almost identical to Eddie's apartment. It is then that the other door in the room starts to shake, and she hears a growl coming from behind her. In panic, she exits the cabin through the window and grabs an axe, trying to hide. A paw grabs her shoulder from behind, and she struggles to free herself, frantically hitting the creature. The beast's roars turn to whimpers when the axe cuts off a paw, and Terry is filled with horror when she sees it transform into a human hand. Leaving everything behind, she runs to the main building and calls Chris while we see a monstrous claw fiddling with a tape recorder. At the same time, Karen sees the scratches on Bill's back, and the two start fighting as she suspects his meeting with Marcia. Losing her usual patience, he gets angry with her screams and slaps her in the face. Karen is shocked and gathers her things, saying she will leave right now and to hell with his health. Still on the phone, Terry reveals her suspicions that the doctor is involved too, and Chris suggests searching the files. She discovers that the surname of the siblings, Marcia and TC, is also Quist. Suddenly, a furry paw clamps down on the files, and Terry looks up, confronting a horrifying werewolf that begins throwing furniture at her. Chris panics at the screams and calls the police, but the monster is already lifting Terry by the neck when the sheriff answers. Her feet gradually stop struggling, and the beast buries its snout in her neck. Chris stops by the occult bookstore to buy silver bullets before heading to the clinic, now much more convinced that Terry was right. With their bags packed, Karen is startled to see the office destroyed, and when she pulls aside a curtain, she finds what is left of her friend. She becomes inconsolable and tries to call someone, but the howls outside begin to overwhelm her, and she bumps into something covered by a sheet. The thing leaps up and corners Karen, who recognizes Eddie by the bullet hole in the middle of his forehead. Still angered by the cinema trap, he says that Karen betrayed his trust, and then shoves his fingers into his own skull, pulling one of the bullets out. His body begins to tremble in a horrifying manner, and Karen watches the complete transformation. Terrified, she fumbles behind her and grabs one of the vials, pouring the contents on the werewolf before fleeing. Chris is rushing to the clinic, but everything seems to slow him down along the way, and no one understands the urgency of the situation. Karen manages to reach the car and is startled when the sheriff arrives with Jerry. Sam's tone is threatening, and Karen is forced to follow them to the barn, where all the patients are waiting for her and Terry's body is sprawled in the center. She runs into Wagner's arms upon seeing him, but then realizes he too is a monster, just like all the patients at the clinic. Donna tells Karen that her life changed when she accepted the doctor's gift and tries to convince her that she will also be happy among them. However, not all the pack agrees with Wagner about this new way of attacking humans. The doctor wants to modernize the hunt, disguising their true nature to blend in with society, while Marcia and Earl do not like this cowardly tactic, preferring the old-fashioned chase. Karen tries to run away, but TC blocks her path, showing her what her friend Terry did to his hand. Still trying to regain control, Wagner reminds them that Karen is famous, and the pack cannot risk exposure. Out of patience with his sermon, Marcia attacks him, and Earl says that you cannot tame what was made to be wild. When Chris finally arrives at the clinic, he is already armed as he approaches the office, remembering Terry's last words about the doctor. However, it isn't long before Eddie ambushes him, taking the rifle from him. He is back in his human form, but his face has been disfigured by the acid that Karen threw on him, making him even more bitter. On the tape recorder, the tape that is playing is the one Eddie recorded, forcing Chris to listen to all the suffering Terry went through. Not knowing that the rifle is loaded with silver bullets, Eddie returns the weapon to Chris and dares him to pull the trigger. He does exactly that, eliminating the werewolf before sprinting to the barn, arriving just as Karen is being dragged outside. The rebellious werewolves plan to throw her car off the cliff, with Karen and Terry's body inside, to dispose of the evidence. Chris's arrival doesn't scare them, and TC begins to transform to attack him, saying that the rifle won't do any good. As soon as he shoots, the group changes tone upon seeing that the bullets are silver, and Wagner tries to resolve the issue through dialogue, but Chris also hits him. In light of this, the others have no choice but to obey him and retreat inside as Karen exits. She helps him lock the beasts inside, and the two set the barn on fire before fleeing to the car. One of the werewolves escapes and tries to attack them, jumping onto the car roof and clawing at the bodywork. Chris shoots through the windshield and manages to drive away, but soon Sam appears in the middle of the road. The two duck to avoid the shots, and Chris sneaks out to counterattack. Sam keeps shooting and breaks almost all the car windows, besides hitting the tires. Then Chris also hits him with a silver bullet and tells Karen to get out of the car, which explodes shortly after. The two run into Sam's patrol vehicle, which is then surrounded by several werewolves. The engine takes a while to start, and the car only moves when one of the creatures is already getting inside. Chris steps on the gas anyway, leaving the rest of the pack behind. Karen holds the rifle when the intruder bites her shoulder, and she squeezes the trigger almost unwittingly, taking down the beast. Chris keeps driving, and when the two look back at the back seat, they discover that the last werewolf was Bill. In tears, Karen says it is her duty to alert everyone about the existence of these beings and make them believe the story. Days later, they are back at the station, and Karen is set to present the news again for the first time after all this confusion. This time, she speaks with a firm voice and without hesitation, but Frank becomes nervous upon seeing that the text is not what is on the teleprompter. Karen explains that the tragedy at the clinic occurred very differently from what was reported and tells the truth about the werewolves. Astonished by this craziness, Fred tries to take her off the air, but Chris stops him. She finishes her speech asserting that she can prove everything she said and then starts transforming live, to the horror of everyone around. The images are broadcast worldwide, and despite Karen's enormous sacrifice, no one takes the scene seriously, and everyone thinks it is just a movie trick. Chris fulfills the promise he made to Karen and fires a silver bullet to end her suffering. Only then does Fred manage to cut the transmission, abruptly switching to commercials. In a bar, people quickly change the subject, and the only one who seems to believe the scene is called crazy. It is then that we see Marcia at the counter, ordering a rare hamburger and ready to resume her life of horrors with impunity.